Hi there. I mentioned previously that I was very fond of the instrumental groups. These were uh, really a phenomenon of the late 1950s, and they flourished really until the rise of the Beatles. And their popularity really was due to the electric guitar, notably the Fender Strat, the electric bass, and which gave a good portable ability to a group, and they produced very atmospheric sounds. So some of the tunes were very simple, some more ornate, but the melodies always appeal very strongly to certain people. So the usual lineup was 4 to 6, uh, and generally, in the majority of cases, the prime instrument, the lead, was the lead guitar. In some cases, it may be a saxophone, maybe another brass instrument, or it could be the piano. And in a couple of cases, there were a couple of instrumentals which were drum based. But mainly it was the guitar. And groups such as the Shadows, the Ventures, um, the Nero and the Gladiators, all groups like this were all based around the guitar. Now, some of the bands started as backing bands. The Shadows started by backing Cliff Richard before they had their own solo career. The Dakotas were backing, well, they were brought in to back Billy J. Kramer. They were a Manchester band, and they released a couple of solo records as instrumentals, The Cruel Sea, for example. Shane Fenton had the Fentones, and they did some instrumentals. They were right up there with any of the others, with the Mexican and Caravan, things like that. So, as I say, some were had the dual role of backing someone else. The Shadows really set the pace, and they hit the top 10 and were number one with Apache. Also, Wonderful Land and Atlantis were number one hits for them, and they were all written by the same guy, Jerry Lorden. Jerry Lorden also wrote Diamonds, which was recorded by Jet Harris, who had left the Shadows and went solo. He had a number one with that. When I went to see the Shadows at the Empire, I was a little bit confused because the bass player didn't really look like he did on TV. I only found out by speaking to somebody that he'd left. He'd actually left that week, and he'd been replaced by a chap called Brian Locking, Licorice Locking. Then a while later, when he was doing his solo career, I went to see him on the Caravan, and he had a backing group, really session guys called the Jet Blacks, and Jet didn't turn up. And so the Jet Blacks performed the numbers by themselves with no lead instruments. It was a rather strange thing. Another band that I liked a lot and were very prolific was the John Barry Seven. John Barry had learnt music in the RAF in the band, and he formed a group of musicians, seven. So they included piano and brass instruments, and they could all read music. So they were very much in demand on TV, etc., because the musical directors could use them very easily. They could say, well, back this guy, here's the music, here's the dots. John Barry went on to have a terrific career in movie music, significantly with the Bond films, for example. And the John Barry 7 guitar player, Vic Flick, is the guitar player on the James Bond theme. That twanging guitar on that was Vic Flick. Vic has written his own book, and I'll be reviewing it. Some bands had gimmicks. Nero and the Gladiators wore togas. The Swedish group, the Spotniks, wore spacesuits, which must have been rather uncomfortable. One of their hits was the Orange Blossom Special, which they played at high speed, and their guitarist left, and they replaced him with an English guy who had decided to learn the material before he joined the group, and he played during rehearsals. He played Orange Blossom Special, and they were amazed because the original, they'd actually speeded it up. The original guitar hadn't played it that fast. Anyway, the book that I want to discuss about this is this one. It's a booklet really, or a magazine. It's The History of Rock, the Instrumental Groups, and it really is a good look back at that era. Even though the instrumental groups were largely superseded by the vocal groups after the appearance of the Beatles, some did still continue having hits. Some people have been playing since the 60s and playing mainly instrumental. Jeff Beck, for example, who has played in groups like the Yardbirds, he had a solo record, Beck's Bolero, which was instrumental. He had Rod Stewart in his band, but then really preferred to have the instrumental lead rather than the vocal lead. And he's still playing, and he plays fantastic guitar all over the world. Some bands were just session players. On the TV, Lord Rockingham's 11, who backed a lot of the acts, had couple of records out which were instrumentals. They were basically a band more than an instrumental group, but they were all session players, mainly jazz guys who actually didn't really like rock and roll. There was a record a while ago, Grooving with Mr. Blow, that was sessions, featuring harmonica session players. Really good piece of music. So in the book we can see lots of very good photos. There's the shadows. There are several pages devoted to them, and also the Ventures, the American group. Bill Black, who originally backed Elvis as a bass player, and a big feature on Duane Eddy. Now Duane Eddy was a solo performer who played the guitar, usually at the low end, and had lots and lots of hits. He's still performing and is still making records. Again, in modern times, continuing instrumentals, you have things like Oxygen, which was a hit. So people still do like to hear a tune. As I mentioned, a lot of the guitar groups produced very atmospheric records, and some of this was due to the fact of the development of the echo box, which was the tape delay loop which produced the echo effect. And all the guitar groups, even the local ones on the Liverpool scene, had one of these. Watkins made one, for example, and they were not really expensive, particularly if you bought them on hire purchase. The Beatles disliked the sound of echo, and they never used it. However, when they got into the studio later in their career, they were noted for inventing effects and playing around with audio to a tremendous degree, and a lot of pedals and effects that continue to this day are based on experiments by the Beatles. Quite a few of the bands covered standards rather than writing original material. For example, Beatnik Fly by Johnny and the Hurricanes was an old Johnny Cracks Corn number, reworked for instrumentals. And Nero and the Gladiators, the entry of the Gladiators is an old tune. And even the Shadows, one of their B-sides was Quartermaster Stores, which is an old army song. And sometimes this is done just purely, the producers would rework the original, and then get a credit for it. So people like Norrie Paramore would make money out of it. So really, I think it's true to say that it was the guys who liked the instrumental groups, even though the girls would dance along to the music. And I don't think you ever got instrumental groups screamed at by girls, whereas the vocal groups certainly did. So I think that was a divide. Uh, One of the things that the instrumental groups did in the early days was provide a basis of sometimes quite a high level of musicianship, which the guys could take if they went into others. And there's quite a few people who transitioned from being in an instrumental group and went into a rock band later on, and they had the quite solid grounding of being able to play and play rather tight. So some of the other things we've mentioned, such as the importance of the bass guitar, we'll be talking about when we review other books. But this, I'll put a link to where you can get it. You can get copies of it. I'll also put links to a couple of the instrumental numbers that you can see the bands perform, and follow up on it. Yeah, you might want to obtain the music for yourself.